What do you think happens when you die? And who do you think was right about the question of the afterlife and the problem of death? A great Christian mind or one of the most brilliant atheist thinkers of the 20th century? I invite you to step inside the shed and beam and have a look around. Welcome, fellow meaning seekers. Welcome back to the Shed and Beam, where we see how the light of Christ shines into the darkness, into the meaning crisis of our age. Today, we're going to spend just a couple minutes thinking about death. And death is especially a fresh, a raw, a very personal question for me now, as just yesterday, my friends and family grieved the loss of and celebrated the life of my dear father. And so obviously I've been pondering a lot what Paul means in 1 Thessalonians 4 when he says we don't grieve as those who have no hope. Is there really such a thing as hopeful grief? Or is death the final word? Is life after death just wish fulfillment? Is it just shutting our eyes real tight and hoping against all evidence that somehow we outlast our final breath? So to get at those questions, I want to introduce you to two brilliant minds, both of them named Russell. In which Russell is right about the question of death has everything to do with what meaning you can find in your life today. So to our first Russell, in his book, Analyzing Baha'i Beliefs, he has this to say on death. He says, Jesus' resurrection from the dead is the very backbone of the Christian faith. He goes on to say the Bible completes the idea of a physical resurrection. He goes on to cite the Apostle Paul in Philippians 3, that our citizenship is in heaven, from which we also eagerly wait for the Savior, our Lord Jesus Christ, who will transform our lowly body that it may be conformed to his glorious body. This Russell goes on to clarify that soma, the Greek word for body here, is used only for a tangible, fleshly body. Now, you may have put two and two together that this is Russell Williams, who is, in fact, my dad. And what he's articulating here is the ancient Christian hope that death is not the final word, and that resurrection is not just a myth, a hyper-spiritual, platonic kind of thing where we float off to the clouds as ghosts. And his argument is that Jesus resurrected not as a phantom, not as a spirit, not as an apparition, not as a hologram. It's not like you could wave your hand through the resurrected Christ without bumping into anything solid. Rather, what Russell Williams is affirming is the historic Christian truth of a bodily resurrection, which forms the foundation of our hope for a future bodily resurrection. So that on this view, I will have a reunion with my Father in an embodied eternity in the new heavens and the new earth. And some of you might be listening to that and thinking, oh, well, that's just a leap in the dark. Some of you might side with the other Russell. Let me read for you from Bertrand Russell, the great early 20th century Oxford atheist, the famous author of Why I Am Not a Christian. Here's what Bertrand Russell has to say. He says, man is the product of causes which had no prevision of the end they were achieving. His origin, his growth, his hopes and fears, his loves and beliefs are but the outcome, listen to this, of the accidental collocations of atoms. No fire, no heroism, no intensity of thought and feeling can preserve an individual life beyond the grave. All the labors of the ages, all the devotion, all the inspiration, all the noonday brightness of human genius are destined to extinction in the vast death of the solar system, and the whole temple of man's achievement must inevitably be buried beneath the debris of a universe in ruins. So notice an interesting connection between both Russells here. Their view of individual death, or what theologians would call personal eschatology, spills over into their view of the fate of the universe, or cosmic eschatology. For my dad, Russell Williams, because Jesus rose bodily, the individual will outlast the grave, and the whole cosmos will experience resurrection. And because of the bodily resurrection of Jesus, there will be a cosmic scope to his redemption, so that there will be a new heavens and a new earth. Well, Bertrand Russell reasons consistently from the opposite premise, because there is no personal life after death. The universe itself is doomed, according to Russell. All of your hopes and dreams buried inevitably under the debris of a universe in ruins. So who's right? Well, maybe you want Russell Williams to be right, but what if Bertrand Russell is right? Let me offer what I think is sort of a fresh argument on why we should go with the first Russell, my dad, over and against the second. And it comes from Bertrand Russell's own words when he says that man's loves and beliefs are but the outcome of the accidental collocations of atoms. Let's zoom in on that phrase, the accidental collocations of atoms, because Russell makes a staggering admission here that all of our beliefs, that would include Russell's belief that there's no God, for example. It's not the byproduct of a rational process of deliberation and proper weighing of evidence and drawing sound conclusions. On Russell's view, all beliefs, including his, are the accidental collocations of atoms. So his belief that there is no life after death, his belief that there is no such thing as a future resurrection, his belief that the universe itself will experience a heat death and all of our hopes will be buried under the debris of a hopeless universe, all of his beliefs by his own standard are accidental firing synapses. It's just brain chemistry. It's no more logical, rational, or true than shaking up a soda can, popping the top, and the fizzing of that chemistry. And that would include Russell's own belief that our beliefs are accidental collocations of atoms. That belief itself can't be justified by its own merits. So I think that's one argument that the first Russell had it right, that Russell Williams, on his worldview premise of Christianity, our minds are gifted to us as truth-knowing mechanisms. They aren't the accidental byproducts of a mindless or literally dumb process. Only one of these two views gives you any reason to think that your thoughts about the afterlife correspond remotely to reality. But let me give a final thought on why I think the first Russell, my dad, Russell Williams, had this right. And this takes me right back to being a new Christian, 14 years old. I got saved out of a pit of really dark suicidal despair, and my teenage mind was full of massive existential questions. How do I know that this drastic conversion wasn't just a trick of the brain? How do I know it wasn't just wish fulfillment? How do I know I didn't just shut my eyes really, really tight and hope that there's some kind of God who loves me? How do I have any assurance that when I talk to Jesus, I'm not talking to the ceiling? How do I know he is in fact risen? And this is where I got to see my dad and his brilliant mind in action. He gave me honest answers to my honest questions. As a teenager, he introduced me to the works of some great Christian apologists, and he walked me through core facts of history. My dad walked me through the fact that we know Jesus died by crucifixion. We know this from sources inside and multiple sources outside the New Testament. My dad taught me the fact that the early disciples had a sincere belief, a devout conviction that Jesus rose bodily. And that belief was so sincere, they were willing to be lion lunch for that belief. My dad taught me that Paul and James, who were no friends of Christianity, they thought it was false. For Paul, a Jewish theologian, a Pharisee, he thought that Christianity was just a cult, a heretical perversion of true Judaism. And then James, the younger half-brother of Jesus, thought his big brother wasn't quite playing with a full deck when he made these grandiose messianic claims. So you have a hardened skeptic in James, and you have an anti-Christian Jewish theologian in Paul, and both of them end up becoming Christians and ultimately martyrs. Paul being beheaded by Nero in the 60s of the first century, and James being chucked from the roof of the temple in Jerusalem, stoned and ultimately beaten to death with a club for their belief in the resurrected Jesus. And the fourth fact that my father taught me was that the tomb was empty. And there's a long list of evidence supporting that fact, both inside and outside the Bible. And so my dad taught me to use my God-given intellect to test various hypotheses against the historic facts, again, that Christian, non-Christian, and anti-Christian historians can agree on, and see which one is left standing. And he walked me through the fact that if Jesus passed out on the cross, the famous swoon theory that hasn't really been a thing for over 30 years in the academic world, can't account for the first fact that Jesus died. The stolen body hypothesis can't account for facts 2 or 3, the disciples' devout belief, and Paul and James' drastic conversions. Maybe they ate some funny chemicals. Maybe there was some funny mushrooms in their salad, and they started tripping out and encountering these Jesus visions. Well, that can't account for fact 4, the emptiness of the tomb. And so you see, the only hypothesis that actually makes sense of the historical data is that he is risen indeed. And so as I grieve and as my family grieves the loss of my amazing dad, we do not grieve hopelessly. And as you face the questions of your own mortality, or maybe you're wrestling with a personal loss all your own, I hope our time together sheds some meaning into those dark places, that you realize it's not wish fulfillment, it's not a vain fantasy, it's not a leap in the dark to believe that there is, in fact, life after death. Why? Because he is risen indeed. Thanks for joining me here for just a few minutes in the Shed and Beam. I hope our brief time together has added a dose of meaning to your day. If you're interested in the question of the afterlife and want to go deeper than a short video can, let me just put a couple resources on your radar. Number one is a brilliant work, a massive tome by the great New Testament theologian and scholar N.T. Wright. That book is called The Resurrection of the Son of God. It is a definitive work, in my estimation, on the question of whether Jesus rose from the dead in real time, space history. A second resource I want to point you to is really the life work of the great New Testament historian Gary Habermas. I had the opportunity to meet Gary Habermas about 20 years ago at a conference in Colorado, where he had just finished reading every book ever written on the question of the resurrection, everything for it, everything against it. And he has distilled decades of scholarly research on this question into his new series. It's a multi-volume series on the resurrection. I'll link to that in the description below so you can check it out. I hope you continue pursuing truth and meaning so that you can see the whole wide world open up in the light of Christ. Thanks.